Hey everyone, thanks for hopping on for our water cooler chat with Shinami Corp, hosted by Ryan Servatius, head of partnerships at Miston Labs. Ryan, I'm going to pass it over to you to get us kicked off. If you have any questions, send a DM to @SWE this account, or share it in the event chat on Discord.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan Servatius. I work here at Miston Labs, and I'm super excited today to introduce Nikhil Chari, the founder, co-founder, and CEO of Shinami Corp. Hello, Nikhil.
Hey, everyone. Excited to be here.
Fantastic. Well, I am excited to do this talk for a long time. Nikhil, you and I have been working together now for some time, and Shinami is one of the earliest partners for Miston Labs, and we're just so excited to get everyone together here on the phone, on Twitter, and have this conversation. So first of all, can you maybe introduce yourself, Nikhil, and talk about a little your background and where you came from before Shinami?
Yeah, so I can start with I got into poker through crypto. And then got into crypto through poker. Online poker got shut down in the US around 2011. The only sites you could play on were Bitcoin poker sites. So this was kind of like a first use case for censorship resistant money. And that's what really got me into crypto. But I started my career in Web 2 normal tech and had kind of like always been into crypto, but not sure what the right point for me to jump in as a career might be. And then around 2016, 2017, when things were really heating up with Ethereum, I went from working at Web 2 developer companies like Twilio to a Web 3 developer company in Alchemy, which was helping enable applications that were being built on Ethereum. From there, I worked at Circle, which is the company behind USDC. And in the process of working at Circle, part of my job was to evaluate a lot of different layer one blockchains to bring USDC to, and got familiar with SWE in that process, got super excited about what was going on with SWE and Move, and felt there was just a huge opportunity for developer infrastructure for the Move ecosystem and SWE in particular. And so when I started talking to you, Ryan, and realizing that my hypothesis about there needing to be good developer infrastructure was true, I kind of just jumped into the opportunity, quit my job at Circle, and went full time to doing Shinami.
It was such a fantastic moment. I remember that conversation that we were having, and I was like, are you ready for this? You ready to do it?
I can remember, like not having a bank account and stuff, and you were like, what's taking so long? Let's get going. And yeah, it happened quick after that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, tell me a little bit more about Shinami. Let's let everyone know what Shinami is. What is its mission? How do you think about the company and what you're offering to developers?
Yeah, I mean, so the mission for Shinami is to power the next wave of decentralized applications. A lot of what we saw, so like I was at Alchemy during the bear market leading into the bull market. And so we weren't really sure what types of applications would take off. And it really only took like 4 or 5 DeFi apps to kick off DeFi summer and get people really excited about the potential of decentralized applications. But then a lot of what I saw through the bull market was, copycatting. Things have worked on Ethereum, like Uniswap and Compound. Let's just kind of build the clone and take it somewhere else. And in a bull market, that works fine because there's so much money to go around that you can be successful doing something very similar to what you've seen in other places. But what I really wanted to see is like the full potential of what decentralized applications could be. And specifically, SWE's infrastructure felt like, okay, this can help untap the next wave of decentralized applications. There just needs to be a developer layer in between, similar to what you have for Ethereum. And so our goal was, let's build foundational developer infrastructure for SWE, starting with a node service that makes it really easy for application developers to be able to build apps without needing to run and maintain their own nodes.
It's fantastic. It sort of leads me into this question about that, right? So here you are, at the beginning, thinking about what you wanted to do, thinking about this radical leap as it is, becoming a founder from, working at a company to founding a company, right? Why specifically did you choose SWE?
So I guess there's two answers to this. One, I would say, is about the crypto space in general. I joined as, before crypto, before working at Alchemy or Circle or now doing Shinami, I worked in the Web 2 space. But I joined the Web 2 space after the big boom in the 90s. So I didn't really get to see the original dot-com bubble. And I feel like I joined Web 2 at the tail end of it becoming a mature industry. And once an industry becomes mature, it's harder to find the big foundational ideas to work on. Whereas for crypto, I feel like it's still super early innings. It's a $1 trillion space and it's become so really quickly over the last few years, especially. But in terms of like the number of active developers in the space, we're still super early. It's still, low tens of thousands generally in terms of like active development happening. And so for me, I felt like the crypto space in general, there's a lot of room to bring in, there's 20 million plus developers in the world. There's a lot of excitement about this space and the things that can be done with this space. We're still super early. We need to bring in more devs. And this is where I got excited about Sui, because I felt like rather than a lot of the L1s that were just kind of doing the scalable EVM play and trying to take market share from Ethereum instead of growing the pie and the number of devs that are coming to the ecosystem, I felt like Sui would actually be able to help bring in more devs and get us to the first million devs, which will get us to the first billion user applications.
That's really, really interesting. In talking to some builders, one of the things that we observe is that there's a case to be made from a product perspective that where you want to build is where the builders and the users are, which would point everyone to a couple of very, very large ecosystems, right? And here you chose Sui for some very particular reasons. How do you think about this choice? So if you're a builder today and you're trying to decide what ecosystem to build on, how do you rationalize that choice? How do you recommend that other builders find the right ecosystems for them to engage?
So first, I would say do a lot of research. It's actually really difficult from the outside. This is something that I learned as somebody who was into crypto, but working in Web 2 and then transitioned to actually working in Web 3. It's actually very hard from the outside to know what's real and what's not and what's going on. And so do a lot of research before making a bet on, where you're going to place your efforts, where you're going to build an application, where you're going to build infrastructure. Choose an ecosystem that is legitimately trying to do interesting things. And then I think some of it you could say is about use case. So, will there be specific chains for specific use cases? I'm not sure yet. One of the things that gets me excited about Sui is that I think it is particularly good for use cases like gaming. And, I like gaming. And so if there's a use case that you are really excited about, I think over time we'll start to see chains that are better for specific use cases. And so if you're into gaming, build on Sui. If you're looking to build a very niche DeFi product, you might want a more mature DeFi ecosystem. If you're looking to build something more foundational as a DeFi product, there might be a layer one like Sui where you can still have an opportunity to build that foundational DeFi product. So it really just depends on what you're trying to build is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, Nikhil, what advice would you have for founders in terms of how best to engage with other founders in the ecosystem and the Web3 community at large? I mean, this is a very close-knit community, and that's true across ecosystems, right? And so as founders are looking to get their start and to engage with an ecosystem, do you have any advice for founders on how best to go about this and to find their people?
So I would say in general, probably because Web3 is open source, there's a lot more cooperation, even amongst what you could call competing products. Maybe this will change over time, but I've just noticed this in general. And this, I think, is also a symptom of the leadership for any one ecosystem. So like the Ethereum ecosystem works really closely together and are reliant on ideals. The Solana ecosystem works closely together. And I've seen this with the Sui ecosystem as well. This is something that has to actually come from the layer one blockchain a little bit, is trying to influence the direction of their ecosystem without being too heavy-handed, but trying to create at least cooperation. And so if it comes from the layer one itself, I think it actually tends to trickle down into everybody that's building on the layer one. We're all sharing this infrastructure, right? We're all trying to build something that is greater than our individual parts, right? Something that is the sum of all the different parts that are built on the same infrastructure. And so because of that, I would say, like, if you're trying to build a company, at least for me, a lot of our success has been from other founders just being willing to pay it forward because they had somebody who was really nice when they were trying to build and who was really helpful to them when they were trying to build. And so for me, like, as we go further in this journey, I'm happy to do that for somebody else. And I've just noticed a lot of builders in the space are quite happy to help other builders in the space because they want to see the whole thing grow. And so I would just say, don't be shy to reach out to other founders. You'll be surprised how friendly the crypto space is in that regard.
Yeah. This kind of ties us back to the beginning of our conversation, which was, for someone that's starting out from the beginning, right? They may be working at a company, they may be working on another project. Can you tell me a little bit about the journey that you went on about starting a company, yourself with your two co-founders? Like, what was that process like for you and how did you approach it?
Yeah, good question. So, it started with, at least with my co-founders, we all had worked together before. So that helped. We already had good relationship and we had all been thinking about doing our own thing and we saw a lot of opportunity in crypto. So I would say the first thing here, this is a little bit specific to crypto, is that again, because it's still early days, but this is clearly a very big space. There's a lot of room for really interesting foundational ideas to be worked on. And so I think probably like any company, we started with just like, we want to work together and we had a whole list of ideas. Some of them might turn out to be good ideas that we just didn't do. But once you have ideas, I think the important thing is to realize that any good idea, it's not just going to be you who's thought of it. There's very few ideas where it's like nobody else has thought of this idea. A lot of it is just about execution, going out there and doing it. And so the first step for execution from the idea phase to actually going on your way to becoming a real company, to me, is just validating. And, that was a big piece of what I was working with you on, Ryan, is just validating that we had an idea that was actually needed for the Sui ecosystem. And then the other piece, obviously, is that you should be working on an idea that you can do well, that plays into your strengths. And so building developer infrastructure, when my two co-founders and I all come from developer companies and a developer company background, just felt like a perfect fit.
Mm-hmm. I wonder, how hard was it to convince this amazing group of founders to come along with you on this journey?
I won't say which is which because it would be revealing too much, but one was ready to leave their job and much more willing to just jump in. And I would say the other had a very good opportunity with like a large tech company. And at the end of the day, it kind of comes down to, it's not going to be an apples to orange comparison, right? So if you're trying to start a company, don't expect your salary to be as good as just continuing with your job or switching between one job to another job. You have to be willing to make the sacrifice at the beginning. As long as you see a path for this to go somewhere, I think people are more willing to make that leap. And if they're really excited about having ownership and being able to at least try doing your own thing. And then a lot of it just comes down to timing. And so with our other co-founder, I think it was kind of a confluence of all those different things in terms of just like it not being an apples to oranges thing and him being in the right place at the right time to make an attempt to try to do a company and actually seeing some potential for it.
When you come into a category like, forgive me for the antiseptic sounding name, but the hosted RPC endpoints, right? Like there are different folks that have tried different approaches there, right? What do you suppose separates leaders in a category like this from the very best in the category? How do you think about the approaches to building and the specific use cases that this developer tools category is really aligned to?
So, developer tools, I would expand beyond nodes, although I would consider nodes like a foundational piece of developer tooling for building on a layer one. In terms of what differentiates nodes, it's subtle because the core of what any node service provider should do is to have a hosted node API. So supporting all of the JSON RPC calls, supporting WebSockets, and everyone will look similar in that regard. So what ends up differentiating one node service from another is actually on the back end, right? The front end experience of using any of these service providers is the same. You're just making the same API calls to retrieve data from the blockchain or to send data to the blockchain. But depending on how the backend infrastructure is set up, you're going to get different degrees of reliability, different degrees of latency, different degrees of issues like data consistency as you're scaling up to multiple nodes on the backend infrastructure. And so I would say best-in-class infrastructure just works. It's reliable. There's very little downtime, if any. There's low latency. There's no data consistency issues. Everything just works. And so I think that is kind of like the core of what you need to offer. And then to your point about specific use cases, over time, then you can also offer additional services on top of kind of like the core JSON RPC calls for specific use cases.
It's interesting. So a lot of what I'm hearing you say is that there's a whole bunch of performance. There are 2 or 3 scoops of reliability mixed into the blender. There are also some interesting adjacencies as well that define this. What does all of that mean for the application that gets built using those nodes?
So the goal for a node service provider like us is to make it as easy as possible for unique apps to get built. And so for the application developer, it should be an experience where they don't need to know any of the complexity that's going on in terms of how our infrastructure is managed. Everything just works, right? And when you have that, then they don't have to worry about running and maintaining and doing DevOps for nodes in the same way that AWS or GCP unlock the ability for developers in Web 2 to not have to worry about running and managing their own physical servers. And so I think the key thing for app developers is just being able to save them a lot of time and headache. The other thing that I actually think is really important for a node service provider is to just have really good support. So allowing application developers to have visibility, like you're going to be more in the weeds on the latest updates on nodes, more in the weeds on what's going on the layer 1, like just keeping everybody in the loop about what's going on as there are ongoing changes, because there are, of course, going to be ongoing changes when you have an open source software, including on the L1 level.
That's really interesting. So if we look at Web3 developer tooling overall, it's gone through, I would characterize, a fairly interesting evolution over the last 5 or 6 years, right? So, you're a veteran of the space. How would you characterize that stuff? How has developer tooling evolved since you've been doing this? And what do you think are some of the biggest leaps forward?
Good question. I would say, so when we were starting out at Alchemy, and even when Ethereum was first getting going and introducing the idea that you can build decentralized applications on the same core technology that Bitcoin first introduced, there was a lot of skepticism about decentralized applications even being a thing at that time. And so at the beginning, when you had the early DeFi apps, the Synthetics, the MakerDAOs, the Uniswap, Aave Compound, etc., then you had a lot of excitement about the space in general, and then folks started building infrastructure. But at the time, you're kind of just building generalized EVM infrastructure without realizing that it's EVM infrastructure. And then over time, there's all these other L1s that propagate because there's so much opportunity in the space. And now people are building infrastructure in some of those other L1 ecosystems. And so the biggest thing that I saw through that kind of proliferation of different L1s and proliferation of different use cases being built on the L1s is that tooling started to become more specialized, which is what you would expect. So you can start with just generalized infrastructure at the beginning because you don't really know what the different use cases are that people are going to build. And there is only one L1 to really build developer tooling for. And over time, what I've seen is that as different use cases have emerged, people are building tooling for those specific use cases. And then as different L1s that are actually like a different design, not just like another L1 that's slapped on the EVM, but a different VM design requires different developer tooling, just like different use cases require certain optimizations to help enable those use cases.
Yeah, when you look into the future, Nikhil, and you look at the next several major innovation cycles, how do you think about developer tools? So this is kind of like looking into your crystal ball. How will developer tools, and let's call it even the broader Web3 ecosystem of tooling in general, how does that all need to evolve in order to bring the next billion users?
So I think it kind of evolves in the same way that I just described, where you have to start with general tooling. So to use Sui as an example of like layer 1 infrastructure, generally speaking, Sui is so different from Ethereum that I would expect to see apps that look significantly different than Ethereum, but I haven't seen all of those apps yet. So at the beginning, you start general, you build general infrastructure that anybody can use. And then you hope to start to see some of these new types of applications emerge. And then as you start to see different types of applications, then I think you'll start to see specialization in developer tooling. Like I want to build tooling specifically for gaming apps. And maybe over time, it'll even be, I want to build tooling for these types of gaming apps and so forth. I think it just goes from broad to specialized as different categories get established.
Yeah. Speaking of these categories, where do you see these categories evolving? Like, what are the things you're most excited to see get built in 2023?
I think we're going to see a lot more of what made Reddit really successful. In general, I think there's a lot more traditional brands, Web 2 companies, you could call them, that are trying to have some Web 3 element. I think you're going to start to see more and more of that. So like to date, it's been quite separate. There's kind of like a crypto economy with tokens, and then there's a normal economy and companies in a stock market, and the two don't really interact. I think we're going to see a lot more interaction between the two worlds. And when there is interaction between those two worlds, I think the crypto part will start to get obfuscated more and more over time. And that's what Reddit did really well, is if you want to build a billion user app, you need the user experience to not be niche and specialized and something that only a crypto native user would be able to use. And that's what Reddit did really well. And that's what I see being a flagship case study for more and more brands coming into the space and looking for that type of user experience where you don't need to know that the underlying protocol is Sui or Ethereum. Everything just works.
What do you suppose with this insight, the it just works piece, what are the infrastructure components that need to come along for this ride? We talk about the interconnectivity of these applications, and we talk about, directionally speaking, the obfuscation of the crypto layer. What are the bits and pieces that you see really needing to come along in order to enable something like that?
There are a few things that I think are really important. One is the wallet experience. So if I think about categories of developer infrastructure, the way I think about it for decentralized applications is that there's three foundational categories. There's smart contracts, which is the back end of your decentralized app. And this is built, if it's on something like Sui or Ethereum, it's built on shared infrastructure. Then there's wallets, which is how the user is going to interact with your app. And then there's node infrastructure, which is how your app reads and writes to the blockchain. And so right now, a lot of crypto apps kind of have all the same user experience from a wallet perspective. I think this is another area that will be specialized, where the user experience of how you connect a wallet to an app will really depend on the type of app, right? DeFi might have one wallet experience, and NFT marketplaces might have another wallet experience. Gaming might have another wallet experience. So I think that experience needs to look like something, or needs to just be as straightforward as possible for new users. Another thing that's really important that we're focused on at Shinami is abstracting away crypto native concepts like needing to have gas to do anything on chain. And so being able to do things like sponsored transactions, also called meta transactions or gasless transactions. I think those types of elements will be more and more important as people think about apps and the user experiences of apps being more similar to Web 2 rather than being for Web 3 only people.
Mm-hmm. How do you think about trust and security, safety, privacy? What needs to happen there for the ecosystem to evolve?
Privacy, I think, is really important for the ecosystem. Like, there's way more transparency in the crypto economy than normal bank wires, for example. And that's good and bad, right? I think there are certain use cases where privacy is going to be really important to even be able to get off the ground. And people and even corporations that want to transact on the blockchain should have the ability to have some privacy. So I think privacy is just kind of like a feature that, again, unlocks more use cases. In terms of trust, the whole reason for this space to exist, to me, is that you have an alternative to one company, one centralized database controlling everything, controlling all of the data, and specifically for your digital assets. Whether this is a crypto token or an NFT that represents something in a game, a single entity should not be able to control your digital assets. You should be able to control the digital assets with your own private keys. And so in that same way, I think over time, we're going to see regulation is going to come to a head with crypto in the next year, which will have obviously a big factor in terms of how this all plays out. And then I think crypto apps will have to think very seriously too about which lane they're playing in and the degree of trust they need to have. Like, as a node service provider needs to think very carefully about not being just a centralized intermediary, but being able to be decentralized in some ways. And I think we'll have more and more of those discussions as people get more sophisticated about how decentralized certain apps need to be and how private certain apps need to be and so forth.
Do you see this evolution as happening across every category, or do you see an emergence of specific security products that come to the forefront, monitoring and so forth? How do you think about the trust in general evolving in Web3?
When I think about it in terms of specific applications, I do think there's kind of like a spectrum depending on what the application is going for. So DeFi is not going for being like a billion user app. DeFi is going for being core financial infrastructure. And so what a DeFi app might think is acceptable for decentralization is going to be different than what an NFT marketplace or what a game is going for in trying to be friendly to a billion users, right? And so I do think it's kind of app dependent. If you're more on the DeFi end of the spectrum, you need to care a lot more about decentralization because of what you're doing. You're building financial infrastructure. Whereas if you're building a game, you're trying to have the best user experience possible. You're trying to have just a great game that users love to use, and you don't want to add friction to that in adding your Web3 elements. And so you might be more willing to have, let's say, like custodial wallets be able to connect. I think the Reddit wallet is custodial as an example. So those are kind of like the trade-offs that I see depending on what people are going for.
So, Nikhil, let's talk for a second about wallets. So you mentioned custodial wallets, right? And in the context of Reddit just now, there's a narrative today that suggests that the wallets are actually critical path to gaining mainstream user adoption in Web3. How do you see wallets as a category evolving, both in terms of the innovation cycle, the trust components? Look into the future and tell us what you see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually really excited to see the wallet space evolve. So one part of this I mentioned before, I think the wallet experiences will look different depending on the type of app that you're interacting with. And again, it'll be about trade-offs, right? So in DeFi, where decentralization really matters, you will never see, or should probably never see, a custodial wallet interacting with, a custodial wallet experience for a DeFi app. The DeFi app itself, at least, wouldn't host that type of experience. So with a DeFi app, I think you'll see the kind of classic connect your own wallet. You should own your own keys, and you should use this financial infrastructure if you choose. Whereas with something like a game or an NFT marketplace that is going for mainstream users that might not know anything about crypto, and this might be actually the first time they interact with crypto, whether they know it or not, the user experiences, frankly, it's just easier to build a good user experience with a custodial wallet because you're kind of just abstracting away things like seed phrases. I think what we'll see over time is A, the UX for different use cases will be different, like different wallet UXs, and B, crypto people will get better at offering non-custodial wallets that still have a Web 2 type user experience where you can do things like social login, where you don't have to manage a seed phrase, but can do other types of things for recovery. That's what I expect to see. And also just like interesting different UX trade-offs as well.
Do you ever see a situation where DeFi embraces custodial wallets?
I think at that point, it would be more likely, like DeFi themselves wouldn't host a custodial wallet, but it'd be more likely a custodial application like a Venmo or a Cash App or whatever it may be that implements DeFi on the back end. I think that's more likely to be where you see the kind of custodial user experience mixed with DeFi.
Well, I want to ask you a question, just sort of backing it up a little bit. When you think about the ecosystem of builders across Sui and across other L1s, are there any teams or projects that you particularly admire? And I wonder maybe why.
Yeah, there are a lot of teams that I respect or admire. I would say in general, the thing that gets me really excited about the space is just the number of teams that are either just like really ambitious or have a really ambitious, exciting vision, and the teams that are very idealistic. And I think crypto kind of merges those two things. And so one of the things that got me excited about Sui and Miston was the ambition, the vision for a new layer one blockchain that's designed from first principles, from the ground up, to be very different than the other blockchains that we see. What got me excited about the Ethereum ecosystem was, the ideals of the Ethereum ecosystem and people like Vitalik. I think what's going on with MakerDAO right now is really interesting. And they've always been a team that I really respected in terms of just like executing, but also trying to stick true to their ideals. DYDX is a really ambitious team, now building their own chain on Cosmos. There's a lot of teams that I really respect, usually for either their ambition and vision or ideals, or sometimes both.
As we think about our evolving ecosystem here within SWE and more broadly, are there things that you would love to see in terms of bringing developers and the ecosystem together at large? Are there events and so forth that you've personally enjoyed and like to attend? And I wonder if there's anything that you'd like to share there that might be useful for us as we think about how we evolve our engagement generally with builders.
I think there's almost too many crypto events now. So I don't think there's any problem of not being enough crypto events. The big thing I would say with SWE is to just articulate the vision as much as possible to as many builders as possible, because that's what got us excited. Articulate the vision, and then don't be afraid to throw in your ideals a little bit in there too, what SWE stands for, and also like the ambition in terms of the tech. Those are the big things that I think evangelize the developer community. And then besides that, of course, like people want to build in a place where there's success. And so the biggest thing I would say too is just like encouraging application developers. I mean, this is hard. I don't have the answers either, but to build something unique. Even if you're doing, let's say, the decentralized exchange for SWE, try to use something about SWE's unique infrastructure to make it unique. That's what will make apps stand out. That's what will make the SWE ecosystem valuable. And I think we're going to see the apps that figure out how to build something unique for the SWE ecosystem be the most successful.
What do you suppose is coming next for Shinami?
The biggest thing in terms of a feature that I'm excited about is sponsored transactions, which we talked about before. Already seeing a lot of apps that are building in the ecosystem, including wallets, that are excited about enabling that feature within their apps. So I think that will be a key thing, and also something that will help, again, differentiate the SWE ecosystem, because there will be these apps that are thinking about really great user experiences, even for new users. I think that is, the biggest thing in terms of features. Other than that, like what we're most excited about is, in some ways, we have the easier job, right? We just provide good infrastructure that works. And then we get to see all of these application developers build really cool things on top of our infrastructure. And so the biggest thing for me is to try to support as many application developers on SWE as possible and get to see the cool things that they build.
So you guys have some experience today in fundraising. I wonder if you could maybe talk a little bit about what the current fundraising environment's been looking like, as someone who might know.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the outside, it does look a little scary right now, right? The markets went down and it's been choppy since then. There's a lot of uncertainty in terms of like the broader macro environment. And we were even a little hesitant about just jumping in, right? Quitting our jobs and just going for it. But I think what you'll find, at least for seed stage, which is the stage we're in, is that there is still a lot of appetite from VCs to invest in things that meet their theses. And so I would say the biggest thing is to just like find the right VC at the right time that is interested in making the bet that you guys are making. So do some research, try to figure out which VCs might be interested in the particular bet that you're making. And then it's really just about right place, right time, right VC, right time.
And how do people look for that kind of partnership? Are there signals that you can read? Is it experience in a category or a space? Is it a personal relationship? How do you think about it?
I think doing a little research in terms of portfolios for different venture capital firms. There's a lot of venture capital firms in Web3 now too. So just spending the extra time to not just kind of go to every single VC, but try to pick out ones that you think particularly could be a good fit based on their portfolio, right? What types of bets do they normally make? What are their theses? Does it fit in with how you look at the world? Are you doing something that maybe they don't already have a company in their portfolio for, but might fit in with their theses, things like that?
Yeah, that's fantastic. I've noticed certainly a lot of investors who have experience in Web 2 making this transition to Web 3. And certainly that's an interesting one because there's so much experience that can be drawn from both universes. And I wonder, in your experience, is there, do you recommend that builders focus on investors and so forth that are Web 3 focused, or do you see value in having a mix between investors who are more Web 2 native or infrastructure native, coming into the space? How do you think about it?
I think it really just depends on what you're building and what you're looking to do. And VCs aren't just, it's not just about the check. I think the biggest thing is to try to find somebody who kind of sees the world the same way that you do. And so that could be a Web2 infrastructure company if you're doing infrastructure. That could be a Web2 gaming company if you're doing a game, or it could be a Web3 company. You just kind of have to find the people who see the world in a similar way to you. I think it'll be a better working relationship and more likely that you'll get funded too.
That's great advice. So you've got a talk coming up very soon, as a matter of fact. I wonder if you can tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm excited to come to the Builder House in Lisbon for SWE. Is this the first Builder House, Ryan?
There's been others, but this is the first of its kind, certainly, that we're going to be doing in Lisbon, and we're very excited to have you there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to come to as many of these as possible. Like I said, we get to be infrastructure at Xunami and just provide the tooling. And so the big thing for me is getting to see the developers who build cool applications on top of our tooling. The other thing I would say, Xunami helps with one piece of the overall stack. The other thing is learning Move and building smart contracts on Move. And for application developers out there, I would say if you look at Ethereum as a corollary, being a Solidity developer is a really important skill now and something that pays really well in terms of a career perspective. And so even if the markets are looking a little scary right now, I think now is actually an amazing opportunity if you believe in the Move ecosystem like we do to build the skill of learning how to be a Move developer. I think it'll be a super valuable skill. So if you're a developer out there looking to jump into crypto, joining these builder houses and learning how to build on Move, I think will be a really valuable skill no matter what you're building in terms of the application.
For yourself personally and the team, beyond the builder houses, are there any resources that you have found for yourself and the team that's been particularly useful in getting up to speed on Move, and particularly the implementation of Move on SWE?
So the documentation, obviously, on the SWE website is really valuable. The other thing is the Discord community, as an example, is very engaged. So I think that's one of the great things about the SWE ecosystem right now is that if you're running into issues, you can pop into the Discord channel and ask questions and someone from the Miston team will help you out. So I think those are two of the big things. Just look at the documentation, look at the existing materials that are out there, and then don't be afraid to pop into the Discord channel and ask questions if you run into any issues along the way.
If you're a developer today and you want to start using Xunami, how do you do it?
So right now we're in a private beta, so you can sign up. And we are letting folks in waves right now, and then eventually we'll have a public release in the near future, I would say.
Fantastic. And do you have any gratuitous plugs for talent or hiring or anything like that you want the community to be aware of?
I'm happy to do a gratuitous plug. We are hiring developers. So if you are excited about what's going on in the SWE ecosystem and providing foundational infrastructure for the SWE ecosystem to help power the next wave of decentralized applications, reach out to me directly, Twitter, Telegram, email. You can email me at nikhil@xunami.com. I'm happy to talk to you.
Fantastic. Well, if there are questions, Kiefer, are there any questions that the group has today for Nikhil?
Let me do one quick review one last time. But Ryan, in the meantime, do you want to plug the next water cooler chat that we'll be hosting?
Yes, I am super excited to announce a conversation with Ola and Kartik from Scale 3 Labs. This is a water cooler talk that you don't want to miss. These founders are amazing, and we're going to have a lot to talk about around observability and monitoring in the network. So please join. That'll be on Wednesday of this week, and Kiefer will have the time. All of the stuff will be out on Twitter.
Awesome, thanks. We had quite a few questions that we were able to answer in the chat specifically, so I think we are good to wrap up. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Ryan, for hosting. Thank you, Nikhil and Xunami, for hopping on and chatting. This was a great kickoff to the Water Cooler Chat series.
Thank you, Nikhil.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. We'll see you on Wednesday for Scale 3.